The fear that gripped the galaxy. The galaxy had one unspoken rule: never go near the Salvarians. They were the most feared species in the known universe. Wherever they went, destruction followed. Planets burned, civilizations vanished, and entire fleets crumbled before them. No one had ever spoken to Excelvar and lived to tell the tale. They did not negotiate. They did not show mercy. So when a distress signal came from deep space, from a Salvarian ship, no one dared to answer. The Galactic Council immediately sent out a warning. Do not approach. The Selvar are dangerous. It is a trap. But one man did not listen. A captain who refused to ignore a call for help. Captain Elias Carter of the Starship Odyssey was not like most people. He had seen war, he had seen fear, but he never turned away from someone in need. His crew, however, was terrified. This is madness, Captain. His first officer, Reed, shouted. Nobody helps Excelvar. They kill everything in their path. Elias leaned back in his chair, staring at the blinking red dot on the holographic map. The distress signal was weak, but it was there. A Excelvarian ship, stranded in the void. Damage. Alone. I know the stories, Reed, Elias said, his voice calm. But something doesn't feel right about this. Why would Excelvarian send a distress call? Maybe it's a trap. Reed snapped. Maybe they're waiting for fools like us to get close. Elias turned to the rest of the crew. Fear was in their eyes. Every one of them knew the risks. But Elias also saw something else. Trust. They trusted him to make the right call. And his gut told him there was more to this than what they had been told. We're going, Elias said. A ghost ship in the void. The Odyssey dropped out of hyperspace near the Salvarian ship. It floated lifeless in the dark, its hull ripped apart by heavy fire. It was clear this ship had been attacked. But by who? Elias scanned the wreckage. No power, no movement, just a weak life signal, deep inside. One survivor. His communicator buzzed. Captain, we shouldn't be here, Reed warned again. If more Excelvar warships arrive, then we'll deal with it when we have to, Elias said. Before anyone could stop him, he grabbed his helmet, activated his suit, and stepped into the unknown. A whisper in the darkness. Inside the ship, it was eerily silent. The only sound was his boots echoing against the metal floor. The emergency lights flickered, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. Then, a sound. A low, ragged breathing. Elias followed the noise, moving deeper into the wreckage. His flashlight swept across the corridor, revealing scorch marks and the bodies of falling Salvarians. They weren't just dead. They had been executed. A chill ran down his spine. Who would dare kill a Salvarian? Then he saw it. Slumped against a shattered control panel was the survivor, a Salvarian warrior. Its dark armor was cracked, its body covered in deep wounds. Its forearms twitched, barely able to move. Glowing red eyes flickered weakly as it turned to look at him. And then, a low growl. Elias raised his hands. He wasn't here to fight. The Salvarian tried to move but collapsed, breathing heavily. Blood, black like ink, dripped onto the floor. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, in a weak, broken voice, the Salvarian whispered a single word. Why? A decision that could change everything. Elias didn't know what to say. He had never been this close to Excelvarian before. Every instinct told him to run, to leave before this creature regained its strength. But then he looked closer. This was not a monster. This was not a merciless killer. This was a being in pain, a soldier left to die. His communicator crackled. Captain, are you okay? Do you see anything? Elias hesitated. Yeah, he finally said. I see something, and I'm bringing it back. Silence. Then, pure panic. You're okay. Reed shouted, but Elias had already made his decision. He reached out and did the unthinkable. For the first time in history, a human chose to help a Xelvarian, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Face to face with the unknown. The silence inside the Xelvarian warship felt unnatural, like a graveyard in space. Elias Carter tightened his grip on his sidearm, though he knew it was useless if this went sideways. A human had never stood this close to a living Xelvarian and survived. The stories said these creatures ripped men apart with their bare hands, tore through armor like paper, and never showed mercy. Yet, the Xelvarian slumped before him was not the monster he had imagined. This one was wounded, breathing heavily, and on the verge of collapse. Its black armor was shattered in places, revealing tough, dark red skin underneath. The long, jagged cuts across its body bled thick black fluid, pooling on the floor beneath it. 4 powerful arms, now weak and trembling, twitched slightly as the creature tried, and failed to move. Elias watched as its glowing red eyes flickered weakly. The Xelvarian's chest rose and fell in ragged, uneven breaths. It was trying to stay conscious. Then, a sound. Not a growl, not a roar. A whisper. Why? The voice was deep, strained, almost confused. Elias wasn't sure what shocked him more, that it spoke at all, or that it spoke in perfect galactic common. He exhaled slowly, keeping his hands where the alien could see them. "Because you sent a distress signal," Elias said, his voice calm but firm. "You needed help." The Xelvarian's eyes burned into him. It didn't believe him. An unlikely patient. "Captain, what the hell are you doing?" Reed's panicked voice crackled through Elias's communicator. "We need to get you out of there. If that thing." Elias cut him off. "Reed, shut up for a second." He stepped closer. The alien flinched slightly but didn't attack. It couldn't. "You're hurt," Elias said. "Badly. I can help you." The Xelvarian let out a rough, bitter laugh that quickly turned into a pained cough. "Help." The word came out as a rasp. A human, helping a Xelvar. Elias didn't react. He just reached into his medkit, pulling out a small injector filled with coagulant spray. "Do you want to die here, or do you want to live?" he asked. The Xelvarian exhaled sharply. For a long moment, it didn't answer. Then, slowly, it did something unexpected. It lowered its head. A sign of trust. Resignation. Elias wasn't sure, but it was enough. Moving carefully, he pressed the injector against the deepest wound and activated it. The Xelvarian tensed, muscles flexing as a low growl escaped its throat, but it didn't lash out. The bleeding slowed. The flesh began to seal. Elias worked fast, treating the worst of the injuries while the alien watched him silently. Finally, the Xelvarian spoke again. "My name is Vorak, the enemy of the enemy." Elias finished applying the last of the med gel and leaned back. "Vorak, huh?" The Xelvarian gave a small, sharp nod. "You don't talk like a mindless killer," Elias said. Vorak's red eyes narrowed slightly. "And you don't act like the cowardly humans I was told about." Elias smirked. "Guess we both believe too many stories." There was silence. Then, a sound from deeper inside the ship. A low, metallic clicking. Vorak's body tensed instantly. His weak arms gripped Elias's forearm in a sudden burst of strength. "Listen to me, human," Vorak growled. "We are not alone." Elias barely had time to react before a new voice echoed through the wrecked corridors. "Vorak, you should have died." A figure stepped into view, a second Xelvarian. This one was uninjured, and it was holding a weapon. The human gamble. The air inside the wrecked Xelvarian warship grew heavy with tension. Elias Carter had spent his life facing danger, pirates, space storms, malfunctioning engines in deep space. But this was different. He was trapped between 2 Xelvarians. One, Vorak, the wounded warrior, had just let him treat his injuries. The other, ***, a fully armed, uninjured Xelvarian. Asterisk asterisk now stood in the doorway, a heavy plasma rifle aimed directly at Elias's chest. Vorak tensed, his weak limbs trembling as he pushed himself up against the wall. His breathing was still ragged, but his red eyes burned with something sharper than pain. Rage. Torvak, Vorak hissed. You should not be here. The other Xelvarian, asterisk asterisk Torvak, asterisk asterisk, tilted his head slightly, his mandibles clicking in amusement. Neither should you. You were supposed to be dead. His gaze shifted toward Elias, a slow predatory stare. And now, I see why you survived, Torvak muttered. A human. Really, Vorak. Elias didn't move, didn't breathe too deeply. One wrong twitch, and that plasma rifle would tear straight through him. Look, Elias said carefully, raising his hand slightly. I didn't come here to fight. I just answered a distress call. Vorak needed help. Torvak let out a dry, humorless laugh. Help? From a human? You must have hit your head harder than I thought. Vorak. Vorak's fingers twitched, gripping his side where Elias had patched him up. The only reason I'm still alive is because of this human. Torvak's mandibles twitched. Then you should have let yourself die. A warrior's betrayal. Elias could feel the danger rising. Torvak wasn't here to save Vorak. He was here to finish the job. Something was wrong. Elias had always been told that the Xelvarians were a united force, an unstoppable army that moved as one. If one of them was injured, the others would rescue them. But this wasn't an ally coming to help a wounded soldier. This was an execution. Elias narrowed his eyes. You were on his crew, he said slowly. Weren't you? Torvak's expression darkened. Vorak stopped being my crew when he stopped being Xelvarian. Vorak growled. I didn't betray our people, Torvak. I refuse to be a mindless weapon. Torvak's grip on the rifle tightened. Elias made a decision. A dangerous one. He took a step forward, directly between them. If Torvak was going to shoot, he'd have to go through Elias first. You don't want to do this, Elias said, keeping his voice steady. If you were so sure Vorak was a traitor, you would have killed him already. But you hesitated. Why? Torvak hesitated for only a fraction of a second. But it was enough. Elias had seen that look before. Doubt. Some part of Torvak didn't want to pull the trigger. Vorak said he refused to be a weapon. Elias continued. What does that mean? Vorak coughed, blood dripping from his mandibles. It means we are not what the galaxy thinks we are. Torvak's glare deepened. Enough. He fired. A desperate move. The plasma shot sizzled past Elias's ear, striking the wall behind him. Not a kill shot. A warning. Vorak lunged. Despite his injuries, Vorak moved fast. His lower arms grabbed Torvak's rifle, twisting it sideways as his upper fists slammed into Torvak's chest. The two Xelvarians crashed into the wall, weapons clattering. Elias didn't wait. He asterisk dove forward, grabbed the fallen plasma rifle, and spun around. Asterisk aiming it directly at Torvak. Enough. Elias barked. The two warriors froze. Torvak glared at Elias. You wouldn't dare. Elias let out a slow breath. I don't want to shoot you, but if I have to, I will. Torvak hesitated, then scoffed. You are a fool, human. Elias smirked. Yeah, I get that a lot. The tension crackled like an electric storm. Then, the ship shook violently. A deep mechanical voice suddenly boomed through the halls. Warning. Enemy vessel detected. Xelvarian warship inbound. Vorak's face twisted. They found us. Torvak's expression darkened. Then we are already dead. Elias's stomach tightened. He had one chance to get them all out alive. And it was going to take the biggest gamble of his life. An unlikely alliance. The ship shuddered violently as warning sirens blared through the wrecked corridors. Warning. Enemy vessel DTCTE. XELVARI and warship inbound. Elias Carter's pulse hammered in his chest. They were running out of time. Vorak, still weak but standing, clenched his jaw. His red eyes flickered toward Torvak, who remained motionless, his expression unreadable. Then Torvak exhaled slowly and muttered, "We are already dead." Elias refused to believe that. "Not yet. We aren't," he said, gripping the plasma rifle he had taken from Torvak. "There's still a way out of this." Vorak gave him a sharp look. "You don't understand, human. That warship isn't here to rescue us." Torvak let out a dry, bitter laugh. "They're here to erase us." Elias narrowed his eyes. "Why?" A moment of silence passed between the two Xelvarians. Then Vorak finally spoke. "Because we know the truth. The lies of the Xelvarian Empire." The floor trembled beneath them as the warship drew closer. The engines of the wrecked Xelvarian ship groaned, straining against the gravitational pull of the approaching vessel. Elias gritted his teeth. "No time for riddles. Start talking." Vorak's mandibles twitched. "You think that Xelvarians are a single unified force, that we destroy because we enjoy it, that we are a threat to the galaxy." Elias nodded. "That's what everyone's been told." Vorak's voice dropped to a low growl. "It's a lie." Torvak let out a sigh but didn't argue. He merely crossed his arms, looking away. Elias frowned. "Then what's the truth?" Vorak hesitated, as if unsure whether to say it aloud. But then he spoke. "We are slaves." Elias stiffened. That was the last thing he expected to hear. Vorak continued. "The Xelvarian warriors you see, our fleets, our soldiers, they are not conquerors by choice. We are controlled, forced to fight wars that are not our own." Elias's grip on the rifle tightened. "Controlled by what?" Vorak's face darkened. "The Hive Lords." Torvak finally spoke. "The real rulers of the Xelvarian Empire. They control us through the bloodbond, a parasite that attaches to our nervous system from birth. It makes us obedient." Elias's stomach churned. Parasites. Mind control. An entire species forced into war. "But you too." Elias looked between them. "You're not controlled." Vorak touched his chest, where his wounds had been sealed. "I was gravely injured in battle. The bloodbind. Weakened. For the first time in my life, I could think for myself. I could question. And when I did, I realized the truth." Torvak let out a low snarl. "That's why they want us dead." Vorak is living proof that the Hive Lord's control isn't absolute. If others learn the truth, the Xelvarian Empire will collapse. A desperate plan. The ship shook again, harder this time. Elias looked at the overhead monitors. The warship was almost within range. "Well, that's great and all," he said, "but unless we find a way out of here, none of this matters because we'll all be dead." Torvak bared his sharp teeth. "You should have left when you had the chance, human." Elias shot him a glare. "Yeah? Well, you should have thought about that before aiming a rifle at me." Vorak let out a pained chuckle. "He's not wrong." Elias turned to Vorak. "Do we have any way of escaping?" Vorak's gaze drifted toward the darkened control panel. "The ship's engines are crippled. Our weapons are offline. But—" He limped toward the console, his clawed fingers dancing over the shattered interface. The screen flickered weakly, struggling to maintain power. "There's an emergency escape pod," Vorak muttered. "Small. Only seats too." Elias swore under his breath. "3 of us. 2 seats. That's a problem." Torvak narrowed his eyes. "It doesn't matter. The moment we launch, the warship will detect us. They will fire before we get far enough." Elias looked between the two warriors. And then an idea hit him. "We don't have to run," Elias said slowly. "We just have to make them think we're dead." Vorak turned to him, confused. "Explain." Elias tapped the plasma rifle against his palm. "What if we overload the ship's core? Make it look like we didn't survive." Torvak's eyes widened slightly. "Trigger a reactor meltdown." Elias nodded. If we time it right, we can eject in the escape pod just before the explosion. The warship will assume we went down with the wreckage. Vorak's mandibles twitched. That might actually work. Torvak scoffed. It's insane. Elias grinned. That's why it'll work. The clock is ticking. They moved fast. Vorak and Torvak worked on overloading the ship's core, bypassing safety protocols while Elias prepped the escape pod. The ship's AI sputtered warnings as energy levels began to spike. Critical failure imminent. Reactor core overload in 90 seconds. Elias helped Vorak into the pod first. He was still too weak to move fast. Then he turned to Torvak. Well, Elias asked, coming or not? Torvak hesitated. His claws flexed. Then finally, he stepped into the pod. Elias sealed the hatch. The countdown was almost at 0. With a deep breath, he slammed the launch button. The escape pod blasted away just as the ship erupted behind them in a fiery explosion. A new beginning. The pod tumbled through space, the shockwave pushing it farther from the blast site. Elias exhaled as he looked back. The Excelvarian warship was nothing but debris now. No one should have survived that. Vorak, strapped into the seat beside him, groaned slightly. We made it. Torvak crossed his arms, his face unreadable. For now. Elias smirked. See, I told you it'd work. Vorak chuckled weakly. You are either very brave or very stupid, human. Elias grinned. Probably both. He turned his attention toward the star map. They needed a place to hide, a place to regroup, because this wasn't over. Elias had stumbled into something far bigger than he had imagined. The Excelvarian Empire was built on lies and control. And now he had 2 of their most wanted fugitives in his hands. The galaxy was about to change, and Elias Carter was right in the middle of it. The war that shouldn't be. The escape pod drifted through the cold abyss of space, tumbling slightly from the force of the explosion. The wreckage of the Excelvarian warship was now nothing more than floating debris, scattered across the void like the remains of a forgotten battle. Inside the cramped pod, Elias Carter ran a quick systems check. Hull integrity was stable. Oxygen levels sufficient. They had made it. Barely. Vorak, still weak from his injuries, leaned back in his seat, his sharp exoskeletal plates rising and falling as he took slow, controlled breaths. His red eyes, dimmed with exhaustion, flicked toward Elias. You actually did it, Vorak murmured. Elias smirked, keeping his eyes on the controls. Told you I wasn't planning on dying today. Torvak, seated across from them, let out a dry huff. We're not dead, but we are stranded. His mandibles clicked in frustration. And we just made ourselves the most wanted fugitives in the Excelvarian Empire. Elias glanced at the radar. No signals yet. That was good, but it wouldn't last. Well, Elias said, seeing as they already wanted you 2 dead, I don't see how much worse things can get. Vorak let out a quiet chuckle. You say that now, human, but you don't understand what happens next. Elias frowned. Enlighten me. Vorak's red eyes burned into him. If the Hive Lords believe we survived, they will not stop hunting us. And if the Galactic Council learns that a human is helping Excelvarian deserters, your own kind will turn against you too. Elias felt the weight of those words settle over him. He had just crossed a line that no human had ever crossed before. There was no turning back now. Nowhere left to run. The pod systems beeped. A planet loomed in the distance. Elias scanned the data. It was a barren wasteland, uncharted, barely habitable. But it had an atmosphere. That's our best bet, Elias said. We land, we regroup, and we figure out our next move. Torvak clicked his mandibles in irritation. A human giving orders to Excelvarians. How amusing. Elias shot him a look. You're free to step out of the pod anytime, buddy. Torvak growled low in his throat but said nothing. Vorak, however, was watching Elias closely, almost curious. "You are different from the others of your kind," Vorak said. "Humans do not interfere in matters beyond their own interests. And yet, here you are, risking your life for creatures your people consider monsters." Elias didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, he didn't know why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was stupidity. Maybe it was just who he was. "Someone needed help," Elias finally said. "That was enough for me." Vorak studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Perhaps you are not like the others." Elias sighed. "Glad we're bonding. Now hang on. This landing is gonna be rough." Crash landing on a dead world. The escape pod ripped through the planet's atmosphere, fire licking at its hull. The alarm screamed as turbulence threw them around in their seats. The ground rushed toward them, a wasteland of jagged rock and endless sand. Elias gritted his teeth. This was going to hurt. Crash. The impact slammed through them like a shockwave. The pod skidded across the rocky terrain, metal screeching as it carved a deep trench into the ground before coming to a violent halt. Silence. Then Elias groaned. "Everyone's still alive." A low growl from Torvak. "Barely." Vorak grunted, unbuckling his restraints. "I have survived worse." Elias let out a breath. "Well, let's hope we don't make a habit of this." He hit the emergency hatch release. The door hissed open, revealing the unforgiving wasteland before them. The air was dry, thick with dust. The sky above was a dull, rusty orange, choked with swirling clouds. The ground was cracked and lifeless, stretching for miles in every direction. It was a graveyard of a world. But it was better than space. "All right," Elias said, grabbing a supply pack from the pod. "We find shelter, figure out what's next." Vorak and Torvak followed, stepping out into the barren landscape. And then, a sound, a low, distant hum. Elias's blood turned cold. "Tell me that's not what I think it is," he muttered. Torvak growled. "It is exactly what you think it is. A Selvarian hunter drone. The Hive Lords were already looking for them, and they had just found them. Hunted." The drone moved fast, a sleek black shape cutting through the sky, scanning the ground below. If it found them, it would send their location to the warship in orbit. And then they were dead. Vorak tensed. "We need to destroy it before it signals the fleet." Torvak pulled his plasma pistol. "Agreed." Elias scanned the terrain. "We need cover. Running in open ground is suicide." Vorak pointed to the west. "There, a cave system." Elias didn't hesitate. "Move. Now." They sprinted, dust kicking up beneath their feet as the drone shifted direction, locking onto them. A sharp mechanical beep echoed from above. "It's CE's US." Torvak roared. Elias spun mid-run, lifting his plasma rifle. One shot. That's all he'd get. He exhaled, pulled the trigger. The shot hit the drone dead center. For a moment, it wobbled. Then, boom. The drone exploded in a fiery burst, raining debris across the wasteland. Silence. Elias let out a breath. That was too close. But Vorak wasn't celebrating. "They will know something is wrong," Vorak said darkly. "And they will send more." Elias cursed under his breath. They needed a real plan. Fast. He turned to Vorak and Torvak. "All right. No more running. We take the fight to them." Torvak growled, but there was a hint of approval in his voice. Finally, the human speaks like a warrior. Elias smirked. "Then let's give them a war they won't forget." The truth behind the fear. The winds of the wasteland howled across the barren landscape, carrying fine dust that stung against exposed skin. The cave system provided only temporary refuge, its jagged walls enclosing them in darkness. Outside, the remains of the hunter drone still smoldered, its mechanical husk half buried in the sand. Elias Carter paced inside the cave, his mind racing. Vorak sat against the cold stone, still recovering from his wounds, while Torvak stood near the entrance, watching the sky like a predator waiting for its enemy to strike. "We can't stay here long," Elias said. "They'll send more drones, maybe even ground forces." Torvak growled. "They will send a purge team." Elias frowned. "Purge team." Vorak exhaled heavily. Selvarian warriors enhanced by the Hive Lords. Mindless. Fast. Stronger than any of us. They do not question orders. They do not stop. They do not leave survivors. Elias clenched his jaw. "Great, so we're dealing with space terminators." Neither Vorak nor Torvak understood the reference, but the weight of the situation didn't need explanation. "Then we hit them before they hit us," Elias said. Torvak scoffed. "Foolish human. You think we can fight the Hive Lord's army with only 3 people?" Elias turned toward Vorak. "Tell me something. If we could show your people the truth, if we could break their control, would they turn against the Hive Lords?" Vorak's red eyes burned with thought. "Yes. If the bloodbind is severed, they would no longer be slaves. They would have the power to resist." Torvak snarled. "And how do you propose we sever the bloodbind? The parasite lives within us. It binds to the mind from birth. You cannot simply cut it out." Elias took a deep breath. "Maybe we don't have to cut it out. Maybe we just need to shut it down." A risky mission. Elias crouched down and grabbed a broken shard of the drone's wreckage. The interior wiring was intricate, alien, but not impossible to understand. "You said the Hive Lords control you through the bloodbind, right?" Elias asked. Vorak nodded. "It is connected to the mind, an organic link that suppresses independent thought." Elias grinned. "So what happens if we interfere with that signal?" Torvak's eyes narrowed. "What are you suggesting, human?" Elias flipped the drone shard over, exposing a small energy node. "If they use a signal to keep your people under control, then somewhere, there's a transmitter, a central hub. If we jam it, maybe we can break their hold, even if it's temporary." Vorak and Torvak exchanged a glance. Torvak growled. "A theory. A foolish one." Vorak, however, didn't dismiss it so easily. "There is logic in what you say. If we disrupt the Hive Lord's control, even for a moment, it could create confusion. It could awaken others." Elias smirked. "Then we find their transmitter." Torvak scoffed. "And how do you plan to do that, human?" "Walk up to the Hive Lords and ask politely." Elias's smirk widened. "No. We steal the data from the warship in orbit." Vorak's mandibles twitched. "That is bold." Torvak shook his head. "That is suicide." Elias shrugged. "Yeah, but what else do we have to lose?" Silence settled between them. Then, slowly, Vorak nodded. "If we do this, we do it fast, and we do it without hesitation." Torvak let out a low growl, but after a moment, he exhaled sharply. "If we die, human, I will make sure you die first." Elias grinned. "Deal." Infiltrating the warship. The Selvarian warship loomed in orbit, its dark metal reflecting the light of the distant star. It was a fortress, heavily armed, heavily shielded. Stealing data from it would be impossible, unless you had a death wish. Which, apparently, Elias did. Using the debris from the downed drone, Elias and the 2 Selvarians built a false signal, one that mimicked an emergency distress beacon. It didn't take long for the warship to respond. A small scout vessel descended from orbit, sent to investigate the wreckage of the destroyed drone. Elias and Vorak hid beneath the sand, buried under a makeshift cover, waiting for the right moment. Torvak stood in plain sight, acting as bait. The scout ship landed, its doors hissing open. 3 Selvarian soldiers stepped out, their movements precise, mechanical, mind-controlled. One of them, taller than the others, spoke first. "Torvak, you should be dead." Torvak smirked. "And yet, here I stand." The soldier's red eyes flashed with aggression. "Surrender. The Hive Lords demand your execution. Torvak's claws flexed. Then come take me. That was the signal. Elias and Vorak erupted from the sand, striking fast. Elias shot first, his plasma rifle slamming into the nearest soldier's side, sending them sprawling. Vorak tackled the second, ripping the rifle from its grasp and using it against the last remaining soldier. Within seconds, the battle was over. Elias wiped sand from his visor. Well, that was easy. Torvak growled, "You are a fool." That was the easy part. Elias glanced at the scout ship. Then let's get to the hard part. The heart of the beast. The stolen scout ship docked inside the warship. The moment the airlock hissed open, Elias and the two Zelvarians slipped inside like ghosts. They moved quickly, avoiding patrols, sticking to the shadows. The Hive Lords did not expect an infiltration. The command deck loomed ahead, its walls lined with glowing red data cores. This was it, their chance to extract the location of the Bloodbind transmitter. Vorak moved to the console, his claws dancing over the interface. "I have it," he whispered. "The control hub. It's on Cell Prime." Elias frowned. "That's your homeworld, isn't it?" Vorak nodded grimly. "It is where this all began." Torvak let out a sharp breath. "Then it is where it must end." Alarms blared suddenly. They had been discovered. Elias cursed. Time to go. They sprinted back toward the scout ship, dodging incoming guards as the warship erupted into chaos. The moment they reached the dock, Elias slammed the airlock shut and hit the launch sequence. The scout ship tore away from the warship's hull, plunging toward the wasteland below. Explosions rocked the space behind them as the warship's turrets opened fire. Elias gripped the controls. "Hold on." The ship lurched forward, disappearing into the planet's storm clouds. They had barely escaped, but they had what they needed. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. One human against the universe. The stolen scout ship ripped through the atmosphere, streaking across the sky like a dying comet. Inside the cockpit, Elias Carter gritted his teeth, fighting against the controls as turbulence battered the hull. Warning lights flashed angrily across the screen. "Hold together, damn it." Elias growled, yanking the controls to stabilize their descent. Vorak sat beside him, his claws gripping the seat tightly, his red eyes scanning the monitors. "We cannot land anywhere populated. The Hive Lords will already be searching for us." Torvak, strapped into the weapons console, let out a sharp snarl. "You're assuming we will land at all. This ship is barely holding together." Elias ignored them both. The warship they had just escaped from was still scanning the surface, hunting for them. If they were spotted, it would take one shot to wipe them off the map. He wasn't about to let that happen. Elias yanked the controls hard to the left, skimming just above the jagged peaks of a desolate mountain range. The ship lurched violently as wind and debris pelted the hull. The sensors wailed in alarm. Then, a red flash on the radar. "Missile lock." Vorak snapped. Elias cursed under his breath. This was it. The final gamble. The enemy warship launched its payload. A streak of fire cut through the sky, heading straight for them. Elias didn't hesitate. "Brace yourselves." He dived the ship downward, spiraling toward the canyon below. The missile followed, closing the distance rapidly. Torvak snarled in frustration. "We are out of time." Vorak's claws gripped the dashboard. "You have a plan, human." Elias smirked. "Yeah, don't die." At the last second, he pulled up, hard. The ship narrowly skimmed the rocky canyon floor, but the missile, moving too fast to adjust, slammed into the cliffs behind them. The explosion erupted like a firestorm, shaking the mountains and sending shockwaves through the air. The scout ship shuddered violently from the impact, alarms screaming. "That was reckless," Vorak muttered. Elias exhaled. "Yeah, but it worked." Torvak growled. "Do not celebrate yet. We are not safe." Elias nodded grimly. He wasn't stupid. They had won this battle, but the war was still waiting for them. The last stand on Cell Prime. After evading enemy patrols, they finally reached Cell Prime, the heart of the Selvarian Empire. From orbit, the planet looked dark, metallic, and lifeless. But underneath the towering megacities, hidden deep within the underground structures, was the control hub of the Hive Lords. If they wanted to free Vorax's people, they had to shut it down. For good. Torvak crossed his arms, his expression hard. We cannot just walk into the core of the Hive Lord's domain. This is madness. Elias smirked. That's why it'll work. Vorax, however, was silent. His red eyes flickered with something Elias hadn't seen before. Doubt. You're hesitating, Elias said. Why? Vorax's mandibles twitched. I have fought my entire life believing I was serving my people's honor. If we do this, if we break the Hive Lord's control, will we still have a purpose? Elias studied him for a long moment. Then he spoke the only truth that mattered. You'll have the one thing they took from you. Vorax frowned. And what is that? Elias met his gaze. Choice. For a long moment, Vorax said nothing. Then he nodded. And that was all the confirmation Elias needed. It was time to end this. The infiltration begins. Under the cover of night, the three of them moved through the industrial ruins beneath the capital. The deeper they went, the more they saw the truth. Selvarians, thousands of them, worked endlessly in underground factories, their movements stiff, mechanical. Their eyes burned red, not with life, but with control. This is what the Hive Lords have done, Vorax murmured, his fists clenched. This is not life. This is enslavement. Elias gritted his teeth. Then let's give them back their freedom. Torvak motioned ahead. The control chamber is beyond that gate. Elias raised his plasma rifle. Then let's knock. A battle worth fighting. The moment they stepped forward, alarms blared. The Hive Lords had detected them. From the shadows, dozens of Selvarian guards emerged, their movements eerily synchronized, their expressions blank. They weren't warriors. They were puppets. Vorax stepped forward. They are my people. I will not harm them. Elias looked at him. Then let's free them. Torvak unsheathed his weapons. No mercy. The battle erupted. Elias moved first, using non-lethal shots to disable their weapons. Vorax fought defensively, knocking his attackers unconscious rather than killing them. Torvak. He fought like a storm of death, his blades flashing as he cut through their ranks with precise, brutal efficiency. Elias saw an opening and rushed toward the main control chamber. The Hive Lord's core *** stood before him. ***, a massive pulsing device, wires snaking into the walls like the veins of a living beast. Elias didn't hesitate. He lifted his rifle and fired, breaking the chains. The pulse of energy slammed into the core, shattering its structure. The room shook violently as sparks erupted from the walls. And then, a deep, inhuman shriek. The Hive Lords screamed. Across the underground city, Selvarians suddenly collapsed, clutching their heads. Their red eyes flickered, then faded. For the first time in centuries, they were free. Vorax fell to his knees, staring at his people. We did it, he whispered. Elias stood beside him. You did it. Torvak wiped blood from his blade. It is over. But Elias shook his head. No. He gazed at the ruins around them. At the freed Selvarians, now standing, confused, afraid, but alive. It's just beginning. Because now, the real war would start. A war for freedom. And Elias Carter, the human who once answered a distress call, had just become the most dangerous man in the galaxy.